Welcome back to Adobe Lightroom Classic, and today we're going to learn how to adjust our image. So there's actually two steps when learning how to use any program. First, how do I use it? How does it work? How do I make those adjustments? Then, the more important aspect is, what do I do or what do I need to do to apply to an image to make it look better? Now, a lot of this can be subjective, and today I'm going to show you in the traditional sense what I would do to an image to adjust it. So I'm going to walk you step by step through the processes, what I'm looking for, what I do, what's too much when adjusting an image inside of Adobe Lightroom Classic. So let's slide on over to Lightroom and take a look at our very first image. So this is our first image, and we have this picture of the woman. And when you're making adjustments, and I don't care what program or what image you're doing, the very first thing that you always should do and need to do is adjust your white balance first, because what you do there can drastically affect the rest of the image. So we're simply going to come over here to where it says as shot. And normally I'm just going to come over here and drop down to auto. All right. Now I might go to another setting if I know that that's going to work better. But in your case, I think auto is going to be the best or most advantageous. Now, one thing that I've noticed is sometimes in images, it can make them warmer. However, in this case, it made the image just a little bit cooler than it did in the default or as shot mode. Does this make a difference in this image? So we have more reds and yellows right here on her body. One of the things I'm not a big fan of is oversaturated color, and this color becomes a little bit oversaturated on her. So I think I'm going to go with auto. However, you could simply come over here to cloudy and test all these different options out once you're learning it. In this case, I'm going to stick with auto. All right. Now, if I want to further refine that, because maybe it made it a little bit cooler, because remember, these are sometimes giant steps. I'm just going to nudge this up just a little bit to warm this area of her face up a little bit more. So I'm happy with that. The next step in the process is what I call toning flat. And toning flat doesn't mean that you're going to have a flat image. It just means you're going to start off the process toning flat. And the reason for this is, a lot of students I get, the first thing they do is bump up the contrast to get that pop in the image. That's not what you want to do. What we're doing in editing is trying to even out a lot of areas in an image. If you increase that contrast, it means you're going to have to apply more of an adjustment to bring out the shadows or darken whites, which is essentially what we're going to do. That doesn't mean that we might need to open up whites and we might need to do the opposite in shadows. But in general, whatever we're doing, we have to make more of that adjustment. It also makes it easier when the image is flatter. So if we come on over to this image and I take the contrast and I boost it up, now you're seeing it's falling apart. We call this blocking, where it turns into like a three-dimensional object. So to open up this area now, I'm going to have to make a stronger adjustment than I would before. And it's going to make it really difficult for me to tone down the highlights if I increase the contrast. So in this case, I don't want to go crazy. And look, these adjustments that we see over here, if your image looks like this, means, yeah, there's something wrong with your photo if you have to make these wild swings like that. That's not usually something that you want to do. You usually just want small adjustments if you have a well-exposed image. If you're doing something crazy, that means you most likely didn't expose your image correctly. So we've got our image contrast a little bit flat. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to open up my shadows a little bit, all right? Because we want to get as much detail in this image as we can. Because remember, we are trying to adjust this image to even it out in essence. When adjusting here, if you have an area, and I'm just going to take my highlights because I know this isn't going to work, and we do this to bring out the highlights in one area, but you can see it blew out other areas, don't do it. Remember, we can make what's called selective adjustments to those areas. So if you have an area that you make an adjustment and it makes one area look better and another area look worse, don't make the global adjustment. So I'm actually okay with this because most adjustments that I make or you should make inside of a program are going to be selective adjustments. So I'm going to hit the letter K normally, but basically that means I'm going to come up here and click this button. All right. Now K is going to give me the brush adjustment automatically, which is what I want. So in this case, I don't want to do any of this stuff because it's really not going to benefit me. So I'm just going to hit K. All right. So we've got that there. So I'm going to take my feather and make sure it's closer to even. And the first thing I'm going to do is I want to darken these books. The books really aren't that bright. However, they're bright in comparison to her. I always goes to the brightest area of an image, which will be here, 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 before it goes to our subject. Well, we want to funnel or focus that area here. So we're going to darken these areas a little bit. We're not going to darken them too much. We're just going to darken them a little bit. So I'm going to come in here and just kind of apply a mask to the areas that I think I'm going to adjust. All right. And that looks pretty good for now. My brush is actually way too big for this. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit Command Z twice and undo that. And let's come in here and I'll hit the K again, and we'll come and make just a little bit more accurate mask so we don't have as much spillover. Actually, it might be helpful just to get this whole piece of wood. So we'll just go like that. I think that's going to work better. A little bit too much up there. We'll hold Alt or Option key, and that's the minus, and let you subtract. All right, that looks pretty good. And we're going to darken this. Now I could just come in here and lower the exposure. Sometimes when you have really bright areas, you actually want to lower the contrast more, lower the highlights, and lower your exposure. And that's just going to really darken it down. In this case, I think it did it too much. So we're just going to say that looks pretty good. It's a little bit blue. I want to warm this up with the rest of the image. And so we're going to add some warmth to it. So that looks pretty good. Let's come on in here and turn the eyeball on and off. That's what it was. That's where it is now. All right. Now I want to darken this a little bit and this a little bit, but I think the adjustments are going to be different than here. There is a way I can do it, but let's just go ahead and make a new one. So we're going to come up here. We're going to hit Create New Mask. We're going to hit Brush, and then we're going to scale our brush down and just apply this area and this area. All right. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to come in here and just lower the contrast, lower the highlights a little bit, and lower the exposure. And that looks pretty good. So we can come up here, see what we did. We just adjusted that a little bit. Now, the next step here is our subject. So the next step here is to tackle the subject. So our subject just needs to be opened up a little bit. Opened up could be the shadows, the highlights, the midtones, anywhere. We're just going to brighten that area up. Now we can make a subject selection in this case, so we don't have to use the brush. So we can come up here, hit Create, select Subject. Hopefully it does a good job and gets the book. Okay, we don't want it to get the one little edge of the book though. All right, so it did a pretty good job there. It actually didn't select that bright area of the book, which is what I wanted. And then we can come in here and we can just brighten her up. I'm going to open up the shadows just a little bit more. And that looks pretty even. Now, right here, it got a little bit too light. All right. When you're adjusting something, one adjustment doesn't always work perfect. So what we're going to do is actually remove that adjustment from that location. So we will simply hit subtract. What method? We're going to use the brush. And then we'll just simply subtract that area from that brightening adjustment. And better. I could go in here and I think I'm gonna make a new adjustment and I'm gonna do a brush and I'm actually going to reduce this kind of small in this area right in here. I'm just gonna darken that down a little bit. All right. We don't want to do it too much. You'll see where I did it. All right. That looks pretty good. All right, so for this image, we're going to go ahead and call it done. A lot of what I'm doing when I use Lightroom, because now this is important, I also use Photoshop. I would now send this image over to Adobe Photoshop and I would take and do adjustments there. Really, I'm making that image just sort of pop there. And the reason I do it there is because I have much more control than I do inside of Adobe Lightroom. So let's take a look at image number 2. All right, so image number 2 is spotty. So the first thing that we notice, and I can see it here in the shadows, is it is full of grain. And we need to run denoise through this, or it's really going to fall apart. If I come up here and I just go ahead and open this image up, you can see all the grain that exists. So let's go ahead and hit Command Z and undo that. So we're just going to right click on the image and we're going to come down here to enhance. And it is going to open up the denoise. I set my denoise at 40. The default is 50, but we're going to go ahead and just do 40. I don't even need to look at my image. I know that's what I want. So I'm just going to click to apply it. It does take a little bit of time for that to happen. Okay, as you can see down here, it's created that new DNG file, and there's our new image. So in this image, we want to open up this location. And this is a great example that if I open up globally, it's going to start to open up some areas and make them too bright where I don't want that to happen. Now, I do want to brighten this up a little bit, but not that much. So I'm just going to make a small adjustment here, and I'm also going to lower that contrast, okay? We're also going to come in here and look at auto and see if I like that better. Not really. Let's go ahead and look at shade. We could look at daylight. Back to as shot. As shot probably looks the best. Let's add a little magenta to it and we will warm that up a little bit. All right, I'm good with that. So I want to brighten this area up. I don't want to get rid of this mottled lighting over here. So I don't want to brighten this up too much because this area is already too bright. So in this case, we're going to do a select subject. So we're going to come over here and hit this. We're going to hit select subject. We're going to let the computer analyze this and select our subject. Now, I don't really want it to brighten this bright area up here. So we're going to hit subtract. Use the brush to manually apply that and make my brush tiny. And we're going to just kind of paint this area out. All right, you can zoom in when you do this, but this is a tutorial, we're good enough. And then we're going to start to brighten her up. So I'm going to open up some shadows and I'm going to open up the brightness. And just like before, I don't want to brighten up an area where it gets too bright, because if I do that, then we're starting to lose that value. I can come in here and do it a second time if we want to do it a second time. So we've brightened that area up. I'm going to try my contrast. I think we can put that back down a little bit. And then we're going to come in here. This is an area where it's really bright up here. I'll fix in Photoshop. We're going to brighten just this area of her face up. So we're going to hit create, brush, make it bigger. We're just going to say just this area. I think that looks pretty good. Brighten that area up. All right. We don't need to make her super bright. This is just going to be a dark image. All right, and we're going to take our blacks and take those down just a little bit so it doesn't get too flat, and that looks pretty good here. So look, I can really go into this image and really start to refine very specific images. I think a lot of times people do something I call microtoning, which isn't a real word, but they just try to make too many small adjustments in little teeny areas. Look for big shapes in areas. That's all I'm trying to adjust. When I go into Photoshop, I'll refine those some smaller areas, but not as many as I think most people would think. So I could go in here and do a little bit more. So today, just for a tutorial, we're going to go in and use Lightroom to make those little bitty adjustments. But just remember, you have the option. All I'm really trying to do in Lightroom is even out my photo. All right, so this looks pretty good here. So I could come in here and I think I could just brighten this area up a little bit more. So we're going to hit create, brush, and we don't want to get that shoulder in. We're just going to come here and go down to this purse. I don't think the legs are as important. Let's do that a little bit more. Command Z and undo that. So we'll hit the letter K. It's a little more feathered. Yeah, that's better. Sorry, my computer's lagging behind a little bit. Hopefully this doesn't ruin the video. All right, so we've got that area there, and we're just going to go ahead and bring that area up. You can take the highlights and bring those up. Oh, that doesn't look good. So bring those down. We're just trying to brighten that one little area up a little bit more. Now I think we have some light here. I maybe want to brighten this area a little bit. So I'm going to hit plus, brush. I'm going to come in here and just do that. Maybe there. And let's try the highlights first. Overall exposure. Yeah, that looks better. So when you're toning an image, you don't want the outside edges, especially where they're not important, to be the brightest areas. So I'm usually going to darken those a little bit more than probably you should. And what we're trying to do is take the light and make it darker out on the edges and lighter in the center, so we funnel towards the subject. So I'm just going to darken this a teeny tiny bit. So I'm going to hit plus, brush, in here, darken that. That looks pretty good. All right, I could darken this or change that if I wanted. I would probably crop this out because I don't like that black angle right there and that. So I'd probably crop this image just under that. But I don't ever crop an image until I'm ready for export, because I want the full image to deal with. Because a lot of times when people want something, or you want something, you might want it a 5:7 ratio, and then a 2:3, and an 8:10. You might do a variety of different ratios. So I want to make sure when I adjust the whole image. And then when I size for output, that's when I crop, and I crop per specific output size. So let's go ahead and take a look at the before and after. So we'll come over here and click this. So this was our before, this is our after. There's areas that still need to be fixed, especially this bright spot right on our forehead, but that's something I would do with a cloning tool inside of Adobe Photoshop. All right, so let's go ahead and switch on over to the next image. All right, so this is going to be our last image in the tutorial. So we have some color issues and some really bright area issues. So I'm going to show you how I take a look at that stuff. Looking at this image, we have this woman here, and it's brighter in the background, but this gives a good contrast. It looks good. And we also have some specular highlights. I think that one's okay, but this kind of pole thing over here is really bad. Look, when you're taking photos, the best thing you could do is actually not include that in the image. But we'll go ahead and try to remove that inside of Lightroom. Now, normally I would do this in Photoshop because it works better. The other issue is we got a really bright area here and this really bright leaf here. And we don't want that because they're distracting. So we're going to tone this down, and we're probably going to remove this because it's so distracting. I think if you gray it down, it's just going to be a grayed down distraction in the image. So the first thing we're going to do is take a look at our white balance, and we'll go to white. And I'm specifically looking at our face. And you can see the issue with white balance and auto anything in programs is it tries to make it more neutral. In this case, we have that warm color, and we don't want to get rid of it. So I'm just going to dial this back up. However, we could go back to as shot and do that as shot, and then just take this back a little bit. And I think that looks pretty good. So there is some magenta in this image. Oh, I don't know if that worked good. So let's go back. We'll just leave it there. It might have made it a little bit too green, but we're going to start here. First things first, we're going to lower that contrast, okay? Because we're going to open this, and we're going to open up the shadows a little bit. And that looks pretty good. All right, so we need to tackle these areas. I'm not even going to make global adjustments. We're going to start tackling these areas, and we need to try to remove that. So to remove something, we're going to click on the new remove tool, which just popped up. So the remove is right here, and we will make this bigger because this is a big area. And we're just going to apply that remove this whole location. All right, that's the area that I want to remove. I'm going to click the remove over there, and we'll give it a second to run through here and see how well it does. All right, so that looks actually pretty good. It has other variations that we could go through and take a look at. In this case, it did a good job, so we're not going to do anything. Then we're going to come in here, and I probably could have done this one as well. We'll go ahead and remove this area and see how well it does there. We'll click that. And we just want to get rid of that highlight because it can be distracting. I could easily cloned it over to here, and I think that would have done a pretty good job as well. All right, that looks good enough. So our next thing, and probably one of the most important, is this area here. We need to darken this. All right. So we're going to go ahead and hit the letter K because we know that brings up our brush. I'm going to make my brush huge in this case. And we're going to come in here and just kind of go like that. For some reason, my computer and OBS are not happy today and they're running a little bit slow. So we're going to go ahead and lower the contrast, lower the highlights, and start darkening that. And I think we need to add a little bit to the mask up there so it's a little more even. But there. All right, that looks pretty good. So you can see we've really darkened that area. Now we can get into our subject. I don't think her legs need to be brightened because we don't need this area to be bright. We just want basically this area in here to be brighter. So we're going to go ahead and hit the letter K. You see all this AI and I still pretty much use the brush. Why? Because I have so much more control over it. And I'm just doing a very loose job in making this selection. All right. So we've got her selected. Then we're just going to come over here and brighten that area up a little bit. Now, a lot of times when you brighten an area up, and you can see the forehead got a little bit dark. This doesn't mean that we don't want to brighten up the forehead, but you usually don't want your forehead to be that bright. So we're going to go ahead and hit subtract, brush. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the flow down. And this is only going to remove some. And each time I go across, it's going to remove a little bit more, and that looks even. And I am happy with that. Now, one thing you do need to pay attention, if you make drastic or large adjustments, it can increase the color. It can oversaturate reds and yellows. So sometimes you need to come in here and make some small color adjustments as well when you're adjusting those. So in general, I think this image is much more even than where it was before. All right, so here is the before and here is the after. We've gotten rid of that ugly thing over there. We've evened this out. Could we darken this a little bit more than now that I look at it? Absolutely. So this is more even. And the focus is more here on our subject than here when she was sort of in the darkest area of the image. And so that's just how to do some basic adjustments and even out your photo. Notice that when I was doing that, I did not touch texture, clarity, dehaze, vibrance, or saturation. I'm a big fan of not using those, all right? This is why you learn Adobe Photoshop. A lot of the aspects where you want sharpening and that come in that step, all right? Now, if I wasn't going to use it, yes, you could do a little bit of sharpening, but you need to understand sharpening works because it's actually increasing edge contrast. And you don't want to over sharpen an image, whether you're in Lightroom or Photoshop. So if you would like to tone some images and you have no idea if they look good, feel free to go over to Facebook, go to the group Shutterbug Academy. I have the link in the description. And you can upload your images and I can take a look at them, as well as anybody else in the group can give you some feedback as to whether you're doing any of these steps right or wrong. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have any comments or questions, you can leave those below. Don't forget to subscribe and have an absolutely wonderful day.